It is no accident that when one approaches James Joyce's Ulysses, one enters the most radical flowering of the novel's dialogic potential, a culmination and transformation of all that Don Quixote began, all that Dostoevsky spiritualized, all that Flaubert interiorized. Here, the word itself becomes the protagonist, the hero of the modern epic. The day of June 16, 1904, compressed into 18 episodes, replaces the centuries of Homeric wandering. The streets of Dublin replace the Aegean. And above all, the human voice replaces the mythic invocation of the muse. If in earlier epics the word served action, in Joyce it becomes action. Yet this inflation of language is not monologic, it explodes into 1,000 registers. Joyce creates a universe where every sentence is a crossroads of voices, social, historical, scientific, erotic, commercial, sacred, obscene, each struggling to dominate and yet inevitably interpenetrated by its rivals. Ulysses, therefore, is not simply a modernist experiment, it is the most complete artistic realization of the dialogic imagination under the conditions of 20th-century civilization. The first and most striking feature of Ulysses is its polyphonic structure. Joyce dissolves all boundaries between literary styles, creating a text that is at once novel, poem, play, newspaper, parody, and catechism. Each episode transforms both its subject and its language, demonstrating that language is not a neutral medium but a social organism, that ages, mutates, and parodies itself. In this plurality of forms lies the very essence of the Bakhtinian novel, truth conceived not as a static idea but as an event in dialogue, an intersection of consciousnesses. Joyce's Dublin is a living repository of voices, each uttering a partial, historically situated truth. Stephen's aesthetic meditations. Bloom's pragmatic kindness. Molly's sensual monologue, all remain unfinalized, open to each other's echo. The polyphony of Ulysses is not the coexistence of voices as isolated units, but their dynamic interference, the way they question, absorb, and parody each other's idioms. Through such interaction Joyce achieves unfinalizability, a world eternally in speech, never silenced by authorial decree. The figure of Leopold Bloom represents a decisive reincarnation of the ironic hero of modernity. Unlike Emma Bovary, who was destroyed by the languages that possessed her, Bloom transforms language through humane receptivity. In him Joyce resurrects the humble voice of everyday discourse, the polite phrase, the banal advertisement, the joke, and above all, the inner murmur of thought. Bloom's consciousness is porous, it absorbs the world's idioms without surrendering to them. His mind is the great dialogic chamber of the novel, populated by linguistic ghosts that he both hosts and humanizes. If the Homeric Odysseus conquered monsters, Bloom conquers meanings. He survives by listening. Every encounter on his Dublin Odyssey, the citizen's drunken nationalism, the barmaid's flirtation, the adman's jargon, is met not with monologic refutation but with patient irony, with a voice that lets the other exist. In this ethical capacity to live beside other voices, lies Joyce's true modern heroism, not the assertion of self, but the hospitality of consciousness. Stephen Dedalus, by contrast, embodies the tragic dimension of the intellectual voice, the monologic temptation of art seeking autonomy from the social. His aesthetic theories, soaring, brilliant, self-reflective, tremble under the weight of linguistic isolation. Stephen seeks purity of expression, but finds only echoes, he aspires to be prophet, but becomes parody. Through him Joyce dramatizes the fate of modern artistic consciousness, its yearning to create meaning out of the ruins of inherited discourses. Stephen's dialogues with Bloom mark a dialectical convergence, the artist learns humility, the man of the world gains metaphysical curiosity. Their meeting in the Eumaeus episode forms a fragile moment of dialogic communion, imperfect yet luminous, where two incompatible consciousnesses exchange humanity without domination. Joyce thus restores to literature the ethical imperative inherent in all genuine dialogue, to hear the other not as an extension of oneself, but as independent voice. Nowhere does Joyce's genius for heteroglossia appear more exuberantly than in the Aeolus and Cyclops episodes. Here, the discourse of journalism, headlines, clichés, hyperbole, is inflated to grotesque proportions, parodying both the pompous authority of the press and the heroics of nationalist rhetoric. The narrative alternates between banal chatter and mock-epic pastiche, exposing how public language lives parasitically on mythic form. In the newspaper office, phrases march like soldiers, they possess grammar but no soul. Yet even this degraded speech contributes to the novel's polyphony, for Joyce gives it enough stylistic dignity to speak itself before being unmasked. The effect is not satire in the narrow sense, but dialogic unveiling. Every language reveals its inner logic by encountering others. In Bakhtinian terms, the centripetal forces of linguistic unification, standard grammar, official rhetoric, are challenged by centrifugal forces of diversification, slang, jest, dialect, parody. Joyce achieves a balance, where order and chaos sound simultaneously. Ulysses teaches that the future of art lies not in purity of style, but in the orchestrated coexistence of linguistic worlds. The Oxen of the Sun episode represents the technical summit of this heteroglossic art. Joyce reconstructs the entire history of English prose, from Latin homily to pharmacy invoice, each style parodying and absorbing the previous. This episode is the novel's genetic code, the evolution of language dramatized as childbirth. The maternity ward becomes the womb of English itself. The carnivalesque principle here operates with full force, hierarchies of linguistic prestige turned upside down, sacred style degenerates into slang, the law of linguistic lineage gleefully violated. Such carnival is not random jesting, but metaphysical celebration of linguistic life, which, like biological birth, proceeds through degradation and renewal. Flaubert purified language to crystalline precision, Joyce re-embodies it, restoring to words their fecund corporeality. Each grotesque pun, each obscene rhyme, each drunken misquotation, enacts the principle I once saw in Rabelais, the mingling of high and low, of speech and laughter, in the great feast of becoming. Indeed, the carnivalesque in Joyce is profoundly interiorized. The feasts, parades, and brothels of Ulysses are not public spectacles, but symbolic enactments of the undying laughter within language. In Circe, set in Night Town, the entire novel erupts into hallucinatory carnival. Moral, social, and sexual conventions invert themselves, identities multiply and dissolve, syntax staggers. The episode is not mere surrealism, but dramatization of language freed from social restraint, revealing its subconscious. Dialogism here becomes delirium, each voice released from structure begins to parody and be parodied simultaneously. Yet through this orgy of discourse, an unexpected tenderness emerges. Joyce's carnival, unlike that of Rabelais, is tinged with melancholy, the laughter of a civilization painfully conscious of its fragmentation. The modern carnival mocks not kings and priests, but the very medium of meaning. Words dance their last dance, before re-entering the mechanical daylight of print. Still, in this irrational bacchanal, human warmth survives, the affection between Bloom and Stephen, the reconciliation of father and son across linguistic chaos. The novel's humanity is resurrected in the carnival's aftermath. Joyce's chronotope, the artistic construction of time and space, demands special attention. In Ulysses, time has lost its epic grandeur, it contracts into the single day of June 16. Yet within that day, through the elasticity of memory and association, time becomes infinite. Every moment, refracted through thought and language, opens like a prism onto history, myth, and personal recollection. Spatially, Dublin functions as the microcosmic body of Western civilization. Each street corner corresponds to an organ in the collective body of culture. As Bloom wanders, he passes smoothly from the democratic space of the pub to the bureaucratic church, from the newspaper office to the brothel, stitching the social body together through his gentle curiosity. The chronotope of Ulysses is therefore centripetal and centrifugal at once, grounded in quotidian routine, yet expanding into cosmic resonance. This synthesis is Joyce's answer to the modern crisis of the epic form, how to preserve the grandeur of myth without abandoning the concreteness of the present. He creates what I would call the epic of the everyday, a world where trivial gestures carry Homeric echoes, because all human acts belong to the same dialogic continuum of being. Within this continuum, language becomes memory, an archive of the human condition. Each cliché, each advertisement, each idiomatic aside, is a fossil of collective experience. Bloom's interior monologue acts as an anagogic archaeology, transforming linguistic debris into consciousness. The phrase, met him pike hoses, or the punning, metempsychosis, become relics where comedy and metaphysics coincide. Joyce demonstrates that the soul of modern man is not a unified interiority but a palimpsest of worn words. Yet this is not lamentation, but celebration. Through parody and play, meaning is renewed. Language, though deadened by bureaucracy and commerce, still contains regenerative power when reinserted into dialogue. Thus Ulysses is both the last and the first novel, the last of Western epics that sought unity and the first to recognize that unity must arise from plurality. The narrative voice of Ulysses, shifting, unstable, amorphous, perfects the dialogic mode I have described as free indirect discourse. Here, the narrator does not hover above the characters, but continually merges with them, adopting, ventriloquizing, and mocking their idioms. The result is a prose that lives at the threshold of subjectivities. The reader becomes co-creator, since meaning must be negotiated between competing tonalities. The author's presence is dispersed yet omnipresent, not as authority but as carnival host. Joyce's silence, exile, and cunning become the artistic ethics of the dialogic novel, silence toward monologic judgment, exile from ideological closure, cunning in orchestrating multiplicity. The modern writer, he implies, must not pontificate but listen, must not command language but allow language to reveal its inner polyphony. Thus Joyce's celebrated difficulty is not obscurantism, but ethical openness. To read him is to dwell in the perpetual unfinishedness of meaning. If one compares Ulysses to Dostoevsky's brothers Karamazov, one observes the shift from dialogic faith to dialogic irony. Dostoevsky's characters still believe that dialogue can save, that voices may converge in higher understanding. Joyce, inheriting the disillusionment of a post-religious century, presents dialogue as endless but not redemptive. Meaning circulates without center, like Dublin's Liffey River returning to the sea of speech. Yet within this spiritual secularization, dialogue acquires new sanctity, as the only remaining form of communion. Bloom's compassion. Stephen's tentative trust. Molly's forgiving affirmation, form the secular trinity of human connection. The famous final yes of Molly, far from mere erotic climax, is the ultimate dialogic utterance, acceptance of multiplicity, consent to the unfinished word. After thousands of pages of contradictions, the novel closes not with God's command, but with woman's affirmation. This yes is not conclusion but opening, a turn toward future conversation. The novel's last word is thus eternally followed by an implied question, what next? To understand the social and ethical function of Ulysses, one must see it as an encyclopedia of the world's discourses. Joyce records everything, catechism, advertisement, medical treatise, song, slur, not to relativize truth into chaos but to reveal the social metabolism of meaning. In this, he stands as historian of heteroglossia. Each speech genre bears the accent of its social emitter, the priest's sermon carries the rhythm of ecclesial hierarchy, the pub conversation the cadence of oral folk humor, the letter the stiffness of Victorian propriety. By juxtaposing these within one text, Joyce transforms the novel into a microcosm of civilization's verbal life. The reader, navigating these idioms, becomes linguist, philosopher, and participant. The novel's difficulty therefore mirrors the ethical difficulty of modern existence, living among incompatible languages without annihilating any. In that struggle, humanity is defined not by unity but by tolerance of contradiction. The comic dimension of Ulysses must not be overlooked. Laughter here functions neither as entertainment nor as derision, but as epistemological force. Through laughter, the novel liberates us from the tyranny of serious discourse. Bloom's mistakes, puns, and misunderstandings invite empathy, not superiority. Comedy becomes the mode of coexistence between finite voices. If tragedy seeks silence after catharsis, the Joycean comic reopens conversation. The novel's energy derives from its rhythmic alternation between solemnity and absurdity. Even the scatological details, the toilet, the body's noises, serve the carnivalesque function of restoring humanity's material truth against abstract idealizations. What in earlier moral systems would be deemed sacrilege, becomes in Joyce's universe the very manifestation of life's ongoing dialogue between body and soul. In this sense, the yes of Molly echoes Rabelais' laughter across centuries, reincarnated in modern form. The aesthetic consequence of this vision is revolutionary. Joyce abolishes the hierarchy between literature and life, between high culture and everyday speech. The printed text becomes a living conversation, demanding from its reader not passive admiration but active answering. To read Ulysses is to enter oral culture through written form, to become participant in the eternal carnival of discourse. This is the ultimate realization of what I have elsewhere called the novelization of the world, the process by which all cultural forms, from science to myth, become dialogically unstable, open to reinterpretation. Ulysses thus represents the moment when literature recognizes its own relativity, and turns that recognition into art. The modernist experiment, far from signaling the death of narrative, announces its democratization. Every word, every accent, every misunderstanding becomes material of creation. Joyce achieves universality precisely by refusing universal language. From a philosophical standpoint, Ulysses may be read as the intersection of three great dialogues, between individual and society, between past and present, and between word and world. Bloom's wanderings articulate the first. He moves through Dublin as marginal subject confronted by collective identities, nationalist, colonial, anti-Semitic, patriarchal. His modest endurance exposes the violence of monologic belonging. Stephen, haunted by the ghosts of Irish tradition and European culture, enacts the second dialogue, the struggle of modernity with its own heritage. Finally, the text itself embodies the third, language wrestling with reality, words attempting to touch the world they describe. In each case, Joyce refuses synthesis. The dialogues remain suspended, like musical chords unresolved, vibrating with potential. This open-endedness is the metaphysical essence of the novelistic world, a universe whose final word is forever deferred, whose meaning exists only in relations. In the broader history of the novel, Ulysses reveals the culmination of the dialogic evolution from Cervantes onward. The Knight of La Mancha heard the world's voices as siren calls to heroism. The Dublin advertising agent hears them as fragments of propaganda, gossip, and prayer. Yet both respond to language with belief. The human faith in the word persists, though now tinged with irony. Joyce's realism, therefore, is a realism of discourse, not material things. Objects exist insofar as they are spoken, remembered, smelled, or misheard. Dublin is less physical city than soundscape, a polyphonic symphony of voices resonating across pub doors, kitchens, and inner monologues. By transforming a day's wanderings into a verbal cosmos, Joyce completes the migration of the epic from external voyage to linguistic odyssey. The hero no longer moves through space, but through styles. Ultimately, the ethical horizon of Ulysses coincides with the ethical horizon of dialogism itself, answerability. Every utterance, however small, demands response. Bloom's compassion operates through this quotidian ethics of answer. His gesture of kindness toward the drunken Stephen, his patience toward ridicule, his silent forgiveness of Molly, these actions constitute the moral law of the polyphonic novel. Against the backdrop of ideological noise, Bloom's quiet awareness becomes revolutionary. He embodies the art of listening in an age of shouting. Joyce thus redefines heroism as dialogic patience, the courage to coexist with otherness. His novel asks of readers the same, not dogma but attentiveness, not certainty but participation. When, after nearly 1,000 pages, Molly Bloom's soliloquy rises as the novel's coda, we find ourselves in the innermost sanctum of the dialogic process, a single consciousness absorbing and revoicing the entire text. Her speech, flowing without punctuation, reconnects thought with rhythm, word with body. It is the maternal voice of language itself, reclaiming the fragmentary male discourses of parliament, pulpit, and pub, weaving them into continuity through desire and acceptance. The syntax of yes moves beyond grammar into music, beyond negation into affirmation. That final word is not naive optimism, but recognition that despite fragmentation, the human voice endures. The novel closes in mid-breath, for any ultimate silence would betray the open principle on which it stands. Thus Ulysses embodies the most advanced stage of the novel's dialogic evolution. From carnival laughter to linguistic archaeology, From heteroglossia to the polyphony of consciousness, Joyce transforms the European novel into a self-reflective universe of language. He shows that words do not describe life, they are life, eternally reborn through dialogue. What began as Homer's monologic invocation of the muse, ends as Molly's intimate self-answer. Between those two utterances stretches the trajectory of civilization, the journey from divine narration to human conversation. In that transformation lies the true modern epic, not of heroes but of voices. Joyce's Ulysses stands therefore as the monumental affirmation of the perpetual word, the world forever speaking to itself, unresolved, unfinalized, yet always alive.